Hello and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson and Tim Shaw. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. Most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that every veteran deserves a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, earn, and build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. Our primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode.
I'm really excited today to be interviewing Holden Lindblom because I've known Holden for over a decade. Holden has an incredible background from enlisted Army, artillery, to community college, to Stanford, to startups, and now building something that is going to massively impact, in a great way, military veterans, service members, and their families. I'll stop talking about Holden, and actually let's hear Holden talk about himself. Holden, first question I have for the military veteran audience, and that is, can you walk us through your journey from joining the military and why you joined the military?
Yeah, thank you so much for that intro, Tim. Really happy to be on the podcast. It's a real honor. My story started actually in Sweden. So I was born in Sweden. My mother was American. My dad met her in Holden, Massachusetts, hence the name, and they moved back there for myself and my two sisters. Moved to North Carolina in elementary school, and then Massachusetts for middle school and high school. And during those transitions, I was not a good student. Quite the opposite. I wasn't academic, didn't try, fairly lazy, and loved video games. Probably a little too much. So in my high school, I got to a point where I knew college wasn't going to be for me at that point. I realized that if I had attempted to go to college, whoever would potentially accept me, that more likely than not, I would fail out. I had looked at a couple opportunities, becoming a line cook at a restaurant, just figuring it out as I go along. And one thing that kind of kept coming up again and again and again was military service. My mom used to joke that when I acted up, that she'd send me to boarding school or military school. And so she might be to blame for sowing that seed in my head. But I decided to talk to some recruiters in my junior year of high school and just saying, listen, I don't think I'm going to pass high school. I think I should probably get a GED, drop out, and go into the military. And this is 2010. So they had said to me, listen, we're kind of accepting GEDs. We'd have to go through a waiver process. By the time we go through that entire process, you got 1 year left. Just graduate. It will be quicker and easier than going the GED route. And at that point, I had kind of made up my mind that, the military is going to be the path for me. This is the only option for me to escape my situation. And not that I necessarily was in a horrible situation, but I didn't have the structure, I didn't have the discipline, and there was nothing really to get me on the right track. And the military for me was that opportunity to fix those deficiencies. So with that little carrot on the stick, I went to summer school. I got straight A's in summer school, and then my senior year I ended with some A's and B's, but still ended up graduating with a 1.8 GPA. I think I was in the bottom 10th, like not bottom 10%, the bottom 10 students of my entire graduating class, but it was enough to graduate. And so 15 days later, I go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, home of the Army Artillery, for basic and AIT. And that was where I was able to get that discipline, get those things that I was kind of lacking at home. So that opportunity to push myself. And I struggled in basic training. I was not a good soldier right away because a lot of people, in my opinion, who go into the military, they probably have done sports. They kind of had that structure. They had somebody else in their family who maybe served in the military, so they kind of knew what to expect. I didn't. My dad served 1 year compulsory in the Swedish Army, which nothing against the Swedish Army. They're part of NATO now. But obviously not as rigorous, especially when it's compulsory. And my grandfather on my mom's side was drafted in Vietnam War, but as a surgeon. And so I think he spent his entire time in Chicago. So that was a big culture shock to me going into basic training. But when I graduated and we did the ceremony at the very end, there was this sense of pride and, oh my gosh, I actually accomplished something so difficult for me personally, that I knew I didn't want to be that bad soldier going forward. And so for AIT, I just gave it my all. And so that's where I, graduated top of my class, got selected for BFIS, got assigned to the 173rd Airborne, and really set myself up for success. And if it wasn't for basic training, I would not be here today doing what I'm doing. And just the friend group, the drill instructors, all of that really kind of set me up for success.
That's incredible. That journey is incredible. And what's incredible is how transformational the Army was in your mindset and your attitude and your opportunities. Do you think that was the case? Do you think the Army has helped you become a better person?
100%. Obviously the good and the bad. But far more good came out of the military than the bad. And I remember this conversation with a friend of mine. It was the last PT test of basic training. I had failed my first two PT tests in basic, and so this was my final chance. And he had this very stern but real conversation with me, and he said, "Lindblom," which is weird being called Lindblom now, but he said, "Lindblom, you failed at everything in your life before. You've given up on every single thing before. If you fail this, you will be a failure the rest of your life, and I will never talk to you again. Just finish one thing once in your life, like prove that you can actually do it." And that tough love and that kind of just like, hey, like, let me lay it out to you. Like, you just have, like, you've dropped all your sports, and any sports you've tried to try, you've stopped all your hobbies, you've quit everything you've quit on. Like, you cannot quit on this. And it was just, it sowed that fire in me of like, not just proving to my friend that I could do it, but like, yeah, like, let me prove to myself that I can actually set out to accomplish something and accomplish that goal. So I think that was the biggest learning lesson from the military for me. And then obviously the other soft skills, the leadership, the, working as a member of a team, to setting goals that are bigger than yourself. Like, I think there are a great number of soft skills that the military teaches that also help. But I think for each individual person, there's always kind of that like one core thing that gets stuck with them. And for me, as silly and as cliche and as sappy as it sounds, like, just like kind of believing in myself was the biggest learning lesson. And that if you put effort into something, there will be a good result. Might not be a perfect result. You might not always be successful, but there will be a result, and that feels good.
Love it. We sometimes joke that the Military Veteran Podcast is a great recruiting podcast. It's not intended to be, but I feel like you should be on Army commercials of like, hey, this is what you can become and how you can leverage your Army experience.
Yeah. And, not everyone needs the military, not, nor should everyone go into the military. But I think for a lot of people, it ends up being a net positive rather than a net negative. And it just kind of depends on your situation and what you're looking for. And the military, for all its flaws, still provides a great resource for many, many people.
For sure. And you came in during the GWAT era. So talk to us about after AIT, you went to the 173rd and 101st, and that
Yeah.
you went overseas. Talk about that, please.
Yeah. It was funny because before I had joined, Restrepo had just come out. And so I had watched it. My parents had watched it for better or for worse, and probably made them less willing to kind of sign those paperwork when I was 17. But having seen Restrepo and kind of knowing a little bit about the history of the 173rd, I am so fortunate for that being my first duty station. Obviously, being stationed in Italy is a great, great privilege, and one of my favorite. It was, I mean, I had two duty stations. My favorite duty station, and by far probably one of the best duty stations you can ever get. But beyond the location itself, the leadership, in my opinion, what I was exposed to was bar none some of the best leadership I experienced. I'm still in contact with some of them, and it was very much servant leadership, always putting the soldiers first. I remember when I was a dumb private, I forgot my Kevlar on a mission, and my platoon sergeant took his Kevlar, put it on my head, and goes, or my FO, put it on my head, and he was like, "Take my Kevlar." And like, granted, it was a training rotation, but the fact that he was willing to take off his, protective gear, give it to me, even though I messed up, it was 100% on me. It was like, no, you get this. Or going to the dining facility, and he's like, you go first. You like, I was like, oh, you can go, you can go. He's like, no, 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 you're the private, you eat first. Like, I eat after you. And small, silly stuff like that, or silly if you're not kind of used to that environment, was just so ingrained in me. I remember when I PCS to the 101st, they gave me a plaque. They wished me the best. They said, whatever you are looking for, this is what you decided was kind of best for you. And we fully support you, and we'll do whatever we can to, make sure you're successful no matter where you go. And so, yeah, that unit I hold in such high regard because of the leadership there and what they've kind of imposed on me in terms of like what is good leadership, what is servant leadership, and how do you treat people, etc.
And then your deployment to Afghanistan, was that with the 173rd or 101st?
It was with the 173rd. So I got to the 173rd in 2011 in like December. So right at the end after basic training in AIT. We'd had done a training rotation to Germany, or two training rotations to Germany, then deployed in July. So we had just finished July 4th. I think it was maybe July 7th of 2012. We went to the Wardak Logar region of Afghanistan, so near the Pakistani border. I was on Fob Shank, and then I got pushed down to the Cop Kurwar, with one of the companies, and was in that region for 9 months. We eventually closed it and moved back to Fob Shank, and it was kind of a bit towards the wind down of the smaller bases and people moving to the big fob. So it was interesting to see the differences between bases in Afghanistan and that kind of wind down region of training up the Afghan National Army and trying to have some form of transition.
Speaking of transitions, so you go to the 101st and then you leave active duty. Can you talk about your experience leaving active duty?
Yeah, so got to the 101st. I had a little less than 2 years on my contract. For me, I had gotten to a point where I felt like I'd gone to additional schooling. I'd done JFO school, BFIST. I deployed with the 173rd. I have seen a second unit, and I kind of accomplished the things I wanted to accomplish. I felt like I had my head on straight. I felt like I could go back into the, quote unquote civilian world and be successful. And I realized that I did indeed want to go to college, that I wanted to continue my education. And being a civilian was the best route for me to kind of accomplish those goals. So at the end of my 4 years, or kind of at the 3 year mark, I said, listen, I'm not going to re-enlist. And got out. So for me, it was, 2015, and through the help of Services School and the Warrior Scholar Project. Services School, of course, is one of the nonprofits you co-founded. They put me on the right track because I had no idea what I was doing. Obviously, there's a ton of great schools out there, but I really thought like, hey, I'm just going to go to the first one that accepted me and get a general business degree and see what happens. But those two nonprofits in particular said like, no, 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 there's so much more out there that you can accomplish. And they held my hand and walked me through that process.
So often when we talk to transitioning veterans, especially enlisted veterans, we tell them community college can be a great option. Can you quickly talk about that journey from active duty to community college to Stanford?
I think everyone should go to community college, regardless if they were in military. Unless you are very, very confident you're going to get into one of the top schools in the country right away, right out of high school, I firmly believe that community college is a great stepping stone, regardless of who you are. I don't think I would have been as successful had I transferred directly from military into a 4 year university, whether that be Stanford or Amherst or like UMass Amherst, one of the UMass systems. It allowed me to be a big fish in a small pond I knew all my professors. I got to pick my classes. I got to be part of student senate and the honors club and all these auxiliary things and not feel overwhelmed by it. When you immediately go into a 4-year university or just school in general, there's so much that you're figuring out once you leave the military. You no longer have to wake up at 5 in the morning if you don't want to. You don't have daily PT. You don't have to tell anyone that you're going somewhere on vacation. Like, those sound like simple things, but when you go from all the structure in the world, when to eat, where to eat, what to wear, how, when you need to get your haircut, what kind of haircut to get, to like none of that, it is jarring. And as much as you think you're going to be prepared for it, it's like, well, like, oh, I was never like that big in the army or blah, 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 or I felt like I had all this freedom. It's going to hit you regardless. And so having that transition process where the stakes are a little bit lower, you have the support system, you can go into the office hours of your professors and talk to them one-on-one and not compete with 20 other students is incredibly valuable. So I am a huge supporter of community college.
Stanford is known for startups, and it feels like you have also really embraced startups. Can you talk about how you fell into startups or what drew you to startups?
Yeah, I had picked Stanford for a few reasons. It was between them and Yale. I got into both. Frankly, we can cut this out if we don't want to have it in there. Yale messed up my financial aid. And the only reason I went to Stanford was because Yale messed up my financial aid. It was my number one Warrior Scholar project. I went to Yale for that. My sister had attended for law school. I held it in very high regard. It's obviously a fantastic school, and for me, it was like I grew up on the East Coast. I know the East Coast. I know people who have been there. I've been there. I'm gonna go here because they messed up my financial aid. I said, well, let me give Stanford a try. So I found a cheap $300 trip ticket. I was there for maybe 2 days total. And I fell in love immediately when I got onto campus. And everything about it, the freedom, the students, just honestly, the campus itself is gorgeous. But I also knew that I strive and do the best when I'm in very uncomfortable situations. In the military, on deployment, whenever I'm uncomfortable, I tend to shine the most. Going to Yale, as weird as this is going to sound, sounded like the safe option. I would be on the East Coast. I would have my friend network around me. I knew what I was getting into. And Stanford felt like I'm going to leave all my friends behind on the East Coast. I'm going to go to a completely different state where I know nobody. And it felt a little bit more kind of like the Wild West. And that's what drove me to go there. I originally thought I wanted to do investment banking because I feel like that's what a lot of, I think, veterans think they want to do when they get out. I'm going to do economics and I'm going to go into investment banking. It makes a lot of money and it's well respected and there's structure and all these other things. But when I did equity research my first summer, I realized like this is not at all what I want to do. I remember in the office there was this conversation about like what color socks to wear, or one of the partners didn't like shave that day or was wearing jeans, and somebody made like a snarky response of like, "Oh, I guess we're dropping the standards." I'm like, "Oh, I left the military to not deal with like I don't want to wear a uniform. Like I wore a uniform for 4 years. I want to relax and like I want to do work, not worry about what I'm wearing." Um, and for me, then the next summer, I said, okay, well, I got to try something else. I'm in the home of startups. I had co-founded a nonprofit in community college. I knew business a little bit and I said, like, let me give this a try. And so at ZX Ventures, which is the incubator accelerator arm of Anheuser-Busch, or AB InBev, the big beer company, I got to launch a startup. A team of three, $20,000, 10 weeks, launch something. And I fell in love with it. It was, bringing coolers down the streets of New York, going up to random individuals, talking to them, asking their opinions, building and iterating, and just all the freedom in the world. And that's what I loved because, although I didn't graduate with a STEM degree, like I very much think of stuff in the engineering or like scientific mindset, like build an experiment and test it. And that's exactly what startups are, is you're building mini experiments. You have a hypothesis, you test it, and you see if you can build a thesis around it, and then you try to grow it based off that thesis, right? And through that second internship, it was like, no doubt in my mind, this is what I want to do. And so when I graduated, it was like, I'm doing this. I don't know what it is quite yet, but I'm going to build something.
So you talked about why investment banking and equity research wasn't something you wanted to do. And a lot of folks pursue those because it's tried and true. There's a lot of prestige associated, like you said. I'm curious for the veterans who are thinking about startups, give them reasons why to do it and actually give them reasons why not to do it. Or could you share?
Yeah. Reasons to do it would be you're the captain of your own ship. Obviously, once you get investors and others, you'll start to become beholden to those individuals. But a lot of the time, it is you're writing your own destiny and you're also writing your own failure. So for somebody to go into startups, you have to have a lot of conviction, um, and that ability to kind of think on your feet and kind of analyze things critically on your own, right? In most big companies, they're going to tell you, here's the process, here's what you're going to do, here's how you're going to think it. And in startups, you usually don't have it. There are sometimes great books out there that you can read, but at the end of the day, nobody's going to tell you the right answer. And so you have to be the one that says, like, okay, this is what everyone's saying. This is what I think. And here's why I think it. And let's see what happens, right? Can you get to 70 to 80% confidence in your decision and be okay with 20 to 30% unknown? Um, and I think that's the biggest perk. Other perks are startups are very much like the military. It's a small team with a common goal, all trying to do well and supporting each other, right? Most startups at the pre-seed and seed stage, you're three, maybe five people, maybe 10, so smaller than a platoon. And you all have this North Star of, I want this to succeed. And nobody really knows what that means, but you're trying to figure it out together. Just like when you're on a mission, and it's like, okay, we were told we need to go here and secure this, or we need to drop off these books here. How are we going to do it? What's going to happen along the way? But we all have each other's back. So I think that's incredibly valuable and makes the transition helpful because you're already kind of in that mindset. Reasons why not to do it: if you're not comfortable with that ambiguity, if you're not comfortable having that onus always on you, and then sometimes there's economic reasons, right? It's very easy for me to say, I graduated and I can start a startup because I can move in with my parents. I don't have any kids. I wasn't married at the time, and I had nothing to lose. It becomes a lot harder if you're an older veteran, you have family, you have kids, you have bills to pay, and you have to accept that either you're going to get paid very, very little or none at all until you start generating revenue. And so, as much as you maybe want to do it, economically, it's just not feasible unless you bootstrap it or find a way to generate revenue really, really quickly. It's sometimes, hey, I need to do this other job in the meantime to sustain myself and my family while I pursue this on the side.
What I find a common theme in your life is you go to very democratic organizations, the Army, community college, and even in some ways startups. And the current startup you're building, VetraFi, has a fair bit of this like very broad-based democratic approach to it. Can you talk more about what you're building at VetraFi?
Yeah. So VetraFi is building the modern banking platform for the new era of service members and veterans and their families. So what that means in short is that the current competitors in the space aren't providing great financial products that build the financial health of their members. So that means a lack of high yield savings accounts, a lack of passive savings strategies, and the lack of credit building products that actually provide cashback rewards. So for VetraFi, we're launching with a secured card, which we call the Emerald card, which in short just means you can swipe your card, whatever you have in your account, you can use on that credit card. It gets reported to the credit bureaus, so it builds your credit. So when you're 18, 19 years old entering the military and you have no credit profile, we get to start building that immediately. So when you eventually get to your first base and buy that first car, you're not going to get hit with that 35% APY. The second is the high yield savings account. A lot of people are nervous about brokerages accounts, investing in stocks. They don't really know what to do. The Fed rate right now is quite high. And so what we can do is offer 3.25% APY on your account. So any money that is just sitting idly by, say you make a $30,000 enlistment bonus when you enter in the military, rather than sitting in a competitor account making 0% or maybe a fraction of a percent, it can sit in 3.25% APY. So every single year it's increasing by about, say it's $10,000, you're making $300 by it just sitting there. And along with our passive savings strategy where the cash back and the roundup goes into those accounts, you're earning not just cash back, but also the interest on top of that cash back. So it's just a quicker, easier way to simplify your finances and set you up for that success.
How much will VetraFi not just provide those tools, but provide like the education or the inspiration to be better
Yeah.
financially?
Yeah, our big push is to make sure that this is seamless, that you don't have to think about it too much. And as much as we can automate it for you, it's automated with those passive saving strategy, with moving the cash back into the savings. But really, we want to be able to educate and let individuals know what they're getting into. I think I can only speak from my experience. When I was 18 years old, coming out of high school, I had no idea about finances in general. Like, obviously, I knew about checking accounts and checks and all that, but APY and credit history and how that affects my loans, all these things are pretty nebulous for most young individuals entering in the military. And unlike the general population where you might have your parents or you're in college and you have that breathing room to make mistakes, service members tend to get married much younger, have kids much younger, buy houses and cars much younger. So the age of 18, 19, 20 years old is so critical. And so VetraFi's mission is really, how do we set them up for success through not just our products, but then education and letting them know why we're doing what we're doing, why we suggest them doing things in a certain way, and so that they can make informed decisions themselves.
How perilous of a state do you feel it currently is for service members and their financial well-being?
Yeah. I mean, a recent Army study came out and said that 38% of service members are uncomfortable in their financial situation and that they're 4 times more likely to be victims of payday loan lenders than the general population. So, in terms of danger, it's quite high. There is not a good product out there that's supporting service members, especially at that critical age. There are other products out there, but not for the military and not for the use case that we're dealing with. And so, yes, there is a massive safety net in the military. Guaranteed housing, guaranteed insurance, food, etc. So the likelihood of becoming homeless in the military is basically 0%. But that's not good enough, right? We shouldn't be protecting against worst case scenario. We should be setting people up for the best case scenario. And I think that's what VetraFi is doing.
And in terms of financial well-being, do you think service members being financially healthy will boost Army and military recruiting?
Yeah. I mean, and even the general economy as a whole, right? The biggest impacts on the US economy has been the GI Bill and the VA home loan. Bar none across any kind of study, those have been the kind of biggest impacts on the US economy. And so it helps the US economy. It also helps retention, right? The military is a very viable path to spend 20, 30 years, and retire out of. But you can only get to that if you feel like you are hitting your financial goals, that you're able to save, that you can provide to your family. And when people are in situations where they're getting hit with payday loan lenders or they're buying a car at 35% APY, they will not recover from that. Unless there's a miracle, you will not recover from buying a car at 35% APY. And what that then leads to is, well, okay, I'm in the military, I only make a couple thousand a month, and now I can't afford this, and so I need to get out to get this other bigger paying job. When government and federal benefits are fantastic. And right, maybe you're making 20 or 30,000 a year, but when you take into account the insurance, the housing, the food, you're looking at really, $60,000, and that 20 to 30,000 is almost 100% discretionary income. And so, yes, it's low in relative terms, quote unquote, but you just have to kind of be smart about it and just not be taken advantage of. And so for VetraFi, it's preventing those bad case scenarios and setting it up that if you were to spend 20 years in the military and you retire, you'll be good. You'll have the savings, you'll have the credit score, you'll have all these things preparing you for that transition.
Does it ever scare you the fact that there are massive banks, some of the largest companies in the world, that are also in this space?
Yes and no. Obviously, big market share. There's no doubt about it that there are big banks in this space that have big advertising dollars. We cannot get a famous NFL player on the Super Bowl. Not yet. I don't think that's what we need, though. I don't think people are making banking decisions on who can get which Super Bowl or which football player on the Super Bowl. Um, for the most part, I think that those big banks have lost track of what's important, what it means to actually serve customers, um, and what products our customers actually need. Uh, and being an early stage startup allows VetraFi to be much more nimble and build products for our customers, not for our board or not for what we think, our customers want.
And it sounds like because it's so laser focused on the military, that's something that bigger banks just don't do. Is that right?
Exactly. As these banks grow and as they need to hit their, quarterly, standings and, make the board happy and all that, they're going to expand and expand and expand and try to reach into different markets or reach into different products. And then then their core product kind of lacks because of that, right? So as they kind of continue to expand, it's less likely that they're going to actually be able to serve their core audience in a proper way.
And it feels like you're saying that there's actually a vacuum, at least right now, in the military veteran space for financial services, financial technology.
Yeah, 100%. In my opinion, there's a vacuum, and we're here to solve that and to fill in that void.
What are potential customers or this demographic telling you, whether it's service members, transitioning veterans, or spouses? What's the feedback you're getting from the customer base?
Yeah, sometimes it's just I don't know what APY is. Like what is APY? Like why is it that like I have all this money sitting in a competitor's account and it's not earning anything? And making sure that that's seamless and easily understandable, and being able to provide a rate that is actually competitive and more than zero, right? Other times it's listen, like I remember somebody I served with said the first car they bought was 14% APY, APR, and they learned about their credit history when they got to the dealer. Like that was the very first time they realized like this is something I have to even worry about. So the unknown unknowns, but then also just help me make sure I don't fall into those traps of help me build my credit earlier and in a safe way. There's going to be a credit card company out there that will probably give you some form of credit, but I can guarantee it's probably predatory and you are very likely to fall into a very deep hole because of it. You might get a $4,000 credit limit, but until you get used to spending on credit cards aren't inherently bad. They're a fantastic tool out there. I don't want to demonize credit cards, but there's a crawl, walk, run process to it. And if you put $4,000 in that credit card and it has 30% APR and you can only make a $200 payment every single month, you're going to be in trouble. And what VetraFi does is ensures that you're always able to pay it off each month, that it always gets reported to the credit bureaus, and that it's going to improve your credit history. And that you get used to that credit cycle so that when you do eventually qualify for a card, you know what to do.
When can customers start using VetraFi?
VetraFi is looking to launch January 1st of 2025. Our first product, or besides the secured card and the high yield savings, we're also launching tax filings alongside April. So all users on the VetraFi platform will be able to seamlessly file their taxes directly on the app and in just a few minutes, not having to transfer anything over. We'll be able to populate most of the fields for you. And so for those in the service, they don't have to find it's not S3. I'm going to forget who in the army does it, but you don't have to find that meeting time and then go across base hunting down that person and hope that they can file it correctly for you. You'll be able to do it all right there in the app, and that money gets directly deposited into your account.
And what's the broader vision of VetraFi beyond the core products you mentioned, the tax filing, the checking, secured
Yeah.
credit?
I mean, VetraFi wants to be the premier financial institution for service members, veterans, and their families. And so that is obviously very broad encompassing, but we want to be there from when you enter into the military throughout your military career, whether that's one contract or 10, and through that transition process and well beyond that. Because we feel like if we can set you up for success at the very beginning, we can then make sure that you continue that success throughout the rest of your life.
Holden, you've been in a lot of startups. You've been building for quite some time in startups. What are some startup lessons you'd like to impart, whether it is on the selling or product building or investor management or fundraising?
Yeah. One of the things I said earlier of being comfortable with 70 to 80% confidence. A lot of the times I think we inherently seek like, what's the answer, right? And in the military, a lot of that time, it could be the platoon sergeant, it could be the PL. It's always somebody kind of higher than you saying, this is the mission, this is the objective, this is how we're going to do it. Or there's FM 6-30 or AR 670-1, right? There's something you can find that tells you the answer. In startups, you really have to become comfortable saying, like, I don't have all the answers. I won't ever have all the answers. And I have to be confident in my analysis or the framework I used in order to come to this conclusion. And let's see what happens. Being okay with changing our mind, being okay with knowing that not all the decisions you make are going to be correct or true, and backtracking and trying something else is much better to try a whole bunch of stuff and fail really quickly and iterate, especially at the early stage, than to kind of go full force into one solution or one path and saying like, man, I really hope this is good, only for months down the line be like, oh, I really should have done this way instead. For investor management, there's sometimes politics involved. Like startups can become very politicky in terms of I need to manage this relationship and I need to send this update and this investor likes communication this way, or they want a monthly update or a quarterly update, or they care about this metric versus this metric. So sometimes you do have to kind of tailor your approaches and just say, okay, I know for these investors, I have to approach them this way. With these investors, I have to approach this way. And having that dynamic and kind of those people skills or the politics of startups. And then just kind of always being okay with being uncomfortable. There's always something that's going wrong. And I don't mean that in a negative way. There's just somebody who you rely on isn't going to be able to get back to you until next week, or this decision is taking longer than you expected, or you're waiting for an answer from somebody else, or you have to talk to lawyers and it's going to cost a little bit more than you want, but you kind of have to do it. And those are the biggest things, is just flexibility, being okay with being uncomfortable, and tackling things as they come along.
VetraFi is building in the fintech space, which is there's a ton of regulations,
Yeah.
and it's very different than building a consumer product. What are, I guess, some warnings you might have for founders who are trying to build in the fintech space?
Whatever timeline you think you're on, times it by two. however much money you think you need to raise, times it by two. Not always, but it's going to cost more and take longer than you expect, and that's okay. The other thing, and a lot of people see it as a negative, is on the one hand, regulation will slow you down. We have to make sure we're SOC 2 compliant. We need to make sure that all our security and compliance is in check. We cannot make a mistake. You have a consumer product, somebody can't log into Facebook, that's fine. Nobody's really getting hurt by that. VetraFi cannot lose a single penny of the customer's dollars. If somebody can't log into VetraFi, hell will be raised because that's somebody's money. And we take that incredibly seriously. So we have a, zero deficiency policy of like, we cannot mess this up. Where other startups, you do have that flexibility. It's okay. If it breaks, just fix it, right? When we're talking about people's monies, that we don't have that same luxury. When it comes to regulation, I do welcome it because there can be so much gray zone or gray areas within fintech. When regulators come in and say, hey, you got to do this, you got to have this policy in place, you can't do that, and you need to be able to check these boxes. Fantastic. Great. I can do that. I can hit all those check marks. I can work with our compliance officer. I can work with our banks. I can work with the engineering team to make sure we hit all those marks. Where when it's continuously gray area, you can be like, well, I think they maybe want this and we're going to build it this way. Only for a year down the line, the regulators to come in and say like, oh, no. That's actually not what we meant. You should do it this way instead. And now you have to backtrack and do it all over again. So for us, it's a blessing and a curse.
How can the military veteran audience be helpful to you?
Join the VetraFi waitlist. Obviously, we have great opportunities for early signups. Promote us on social media. Talk to your friends about it. Talk to people who are still in the military. Again, if you know somebody who's about to join or is in their first year or two of their contract, let them know about VetraFi. But then also give us feedback. We are constantly iterating. We're constantly trying to improve our product. And so if there's something that you don't see us doing, or you look at the app and man, if only they had this, let us know. I can't guarantee that that's going to happen or we can implement it a month from now, but it's better for us to be tracking that and to know deeply and truly what our customers want than for us to make big assumptions on what our customers need.
And you have said that VetraFi caters to the entire military demographic, and it's typically broken into three parts. You come in, join the military, you're in the military, and you leave the military. Where do you think you might see some traction and success, and where do you think you're going to kind of focus your priorities now?
Priorities now is that kind of 18 to 20-year-old first contract, either in the recruiting office, opening up their very first bank account, or they've been in their first unit for their kind of first year. That's kind of where our products lie right now. Obviously, anybody can join and anybody can benefit from it, but our main demographic, our main kind of wedge into the market is that early enlisted service member, because that's where we feel like we can have the biggest impact right now with the products that we can offer. Obviously, anybody can benefit with the tax filings and whatnot. But as we grow and as we move into 2025 and 2026, then we'll be able to encompass and target more of those, mid-contract or, been in for a little bit, E4s, E5s, E6s.
Let's say we do this interview again in 5 years, or maybe even in 10 years. What do you think success looks like?
Are our customers better off than when let me start that over. Are our customers better than when they started? I mean, that is success. Our customer success is our success. We can obviously talk, we have 100,000 customers, 200,000 customers. We have this kind of revenue or these margins. I think those come with having a good product. So many times, people think like, well, you have to kind of provide lackluster customers in order to get good revenue or good margins and all that. I mean, we've crunched the numbers, so I've done the models. Like, we can have both a fantastic product that truly benefits our customer and be a good, successful company that has the margin, has the revenue, and has the customer base. So for us, it's, you know, do the customers like us? Are they benefiting from our products? Um, and are we a market leader? I mean, I think within 5 years, we can take substantial market share away and become a big player within this space.
Speaking of market share, is there a fair bit of market share that isn't currently captured by the incumbents that are focused completely on the military veteran space?
Yeah, there's about 17% that doesn't get encompassed within the kind of top three competitors within the space. But by and large, almost 70% of the market is those top three competitors, with the rest kind of falling to auxiliary banks, maybe local credit unions, or a bank that their parents set up for them back home, etc.
No one's thought to or been bold enough to want to do something in this space for decades now. Do you think pursuing this is either foolhardy, and do you think it is a big enough space to go after? Two questions.
It's 100% a big enough space. 36 million members, 425 billion in AUM. I mean, that is the military banking, market. That includes their families, relatives, etc. There have been other people who have attempted something within the space. More often than not, it's due to not the right team, not enough money, and the inability to execute fast enough. And when I say fast enough, I don't mean, hey, can you launch something tomorrow? But can you launch something before your money runs out? And do you have the operational know how to execute on that? A lot of the times things do well or fail because of operations. Can you manage the teams? Can you manage expectations? Can you get something live? Is it not, too complicated that you can be able to pivot when you need to pivot? And so I have no doubt others have tried, but when those other three things haven't kind of coalesced, it's really hard to be successful. And I think the VetraFi team has the ability, the know-how, and the expertise to be successful.
Do you think the undercurrents of technology and technology being unbundled and more things being able to be built on current financial technology is a reason to build this, or do you think it actually is inhibiting your ability to build?
No, 100%. I mean, technology has come a long way. There are banks out there that use technology from the 80s or 90s, um, which makes analytics incredibly tough. It makes just upgrading things tough. It makes making new features or products incredibly tough. So being able to build on a modern infrastructure is massive because although there's still sometimes banking cores that we still rely on, we have a much newer platform that we can build. And so we're not as limited as some of the competitors in what we can offer, how we can build it, and how quick we can get it to market.
Undoubtedly, a competitor or some competitors are going to listen to this podcast. They're going to want to be like, okay, how does Holden think about this opportunity? This is your point to, or your moment to kind of dissuade them or give them some, warnings as to why they shouldn't try to pursue this. Any thoughts on that?
Most big companies don't pursue something new because the opportunity cost doesn't make sense to them. I think the competitors in the space right now have gotten incredibly complacent for good reason, right? If the top three own 70% of the market, why would they try something new? Um, and so I would say, listen, like the opportunity cost doesn't make sense for you. Go broaden your reach to civilians. Go deal with annuities, or go build some other thing that you now think is like the thing that's going to be your core product. Um, I don't see why they would kind of take a step back and reapproach the audience that they feel they've already captured. For us, I think we'll be able to beat them both on product, speed, agility. Um, and for us, I mean, that's our strength, right? We do not have a gigantic multi-thousand person organization to deal with. We're small, we're nimble, and whatever takes us 6 months or 8 months to do will take them 3 years. So by the time they finish the product that we're building, we'll be years ahead of them already.
Would you say you're building VetraFi for what you wish you had when you joined the Army?
Yeah, 100%. I did not have any of this. I had to build my credit the hard way. I had loans that were less than ideal. I had to rely on co-signers, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it would have been great if I could have just signed for something individually, right? And so, I had $15,000 sign-on bonus as an enlisted, and that sat there making nothing. And I wish that when I transitioned out of the military, I had an actual safety net for when I went to community college, when I went to Stanford, and not having to feel like I'm starting from scratch as I'm transitioning out and dealing with everything else at the same time.
So it feels like there's also opportunity for VetraFi to help veterans as they transition out too.
100%. We will be able to build products throughout those three phases that we mentioned. And so from when you get in, from when you're in to when you get out, we'll be able to build products around that to support you to make sure that that transition is as smooth as possible and that you have the resources to be successful.
Now I'm going to ask less hard-hitting questions and round
Yeah.
up with some more get to know you type of questions. My understanding, Holden, is that you are a culinary expert. What are some of your favorite types of foods?
Yes, when I got out, I one summer I worked at Abercrombie and Fitch, and another summer I worked as a line cook in a gastropub in Providence, Rhode Island. I've been a cook my entire life, and so I love cooking. The question was favorite culinary create that I make myself.
Either that you make yourself or you get to enjoy.
I make a pretty good lasagna with bechamel. You got to go bechamel. Can't go ricotta. And you get the mortadella in there and the prosciutto, and then like a homemade bolognese. That is incredible. I also like a couple Swedish dishes, which like some smoked herring or smoked fish. There's one called Flying Jacob, which is like a very weird Swedish mix, like a chicken dish. And then pizza. I mean, as lame as it sounds, like a good pepperoni pizza is one of the things that like is so homey for me, and it just like hits the spot. And obviously, I live in New York, so yeah, you really can't beat it. But if it's like a stew, a lot of French dishes, a bouillabaisse or a coq au vin, I like really homey dishes that are like either like considered like a peasant dish. Um, and just like kind of takes you back to like a warmer time.
Back again to those democratic roots, Army, community college, even your culinary preferences.
A
What are
man
some of
of the
your
people.
man of the people? And VetraFi is a product for the people, especially
Exactly.
service members. Um, and then how about some of your favorite movies?
Favorite movies. I'm rewatching Lord of the Rings for the umpteenth time. I do like Interstellar, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm a big like kind of sci-fi space person. Um, yeah, anything kind of fiction or fantasy, sci-fi is up my alley. Yeah, I'll have to go with those. I could probably rattle off some. Quentin Tarantino. I mean, as cliche, I feel like every guy says like Quentin Tarantino movies, but like Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are just like I feel like classic movies.
How about favorite historical leaders?
Ooh, Putting me on the spot there. I hate giving cliche answers, which sometimes a lot of my answers are cliche. You could say like Abraham Lincoln. Um, I might have to get back to you on that one. I mean, like Winston Churchill. If like you think of like World War II, like I mean, you could think of like the Allies and like some of the big historical figures in like World War II. Um, like managing that. Yeah, I can't give you a great answer on that one besides like kind of the really well known ones. I wish I could give like a out of left field like a political figure that like most people don't think about that are like um Grace Hopper. I mean like not really a political figure, but like a gigantic contributor to like computer science and like women's rights and like that entire field. So it's a very meandering answer. Sorry.
It's a great answer. We've had best-selling writers who have also chosen Lincoln and others who have chosen Churchill. So that's really interesting. Last question is favorite types of music or musicians.
Ooh, indie and alternative. If I'm like really trying to jam out on some work, I usually throw some like lost frequencies or some like sort of EDM and just like let that set the pace of my working style. But yeah, LCD sound system, Interpol, uh, uh, idols. Yeah, those I usually like a mix of alternative and indie.
Holden, this was really fun and got to know you so much better and got to understand the VetraFi story and vision. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and wishing
Th-
you and your team incredible success.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.